Assalamualaikum, salam sejahtera and good afternoon to our guest speakers, Ms. Tam Lee Jun, Executive Director, Corporate Tax Division, Deloitte Malaysia, Ms. Wong Puh Gang, Director, Tax Indirect Tax, Deloitte Malaysia, Mr. Nicholas Lee, Associate Director, Tax and Indirect Tax, Deloitte Malaysia. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining this breakout session 4 on the Smart Tax Incentive Scheme for Strategic Export Advantage. This session will provide information on how companies could leverage on tax incentives to sustain business. One main point highlighted by Professor Lim Chin Lang in the Expert Insight session this morning on the importance for companies to understand the compliance factor in dealing with international trade. Compliance can be tariff, non-tariff barriers, and even regulations. Tax is an element of regulations that need to be understood and complied by companies venturing into the international market. The topics that were presented by our guest speakers will be covering on free trade agreements, general overview for licensed manufacturing warehouse, bonded warehouse and free zones, latest facilities for sales tax purpose, and case study on critical tax matters to consider for pricing purposes. Let me briefly introduce our guest speakers for our session today. Firstly, we have Ms. Tam Lee Jun, Executive Director, Corporate Tax Division of Deloitte Malaysia, an Executive Director in Deloitte Malaysia's Corporate Tax Division and has more than 20 years experience in the profession. She specializes in incentive and grant applications and has assisted multinational clients to approach ministries and various agencies to propose and successfully obtain enhanced incentive. We also have Ms. Wong Puh Gang, Director in Indirect Tax Division. Ms. Wong currently advises clients on indirect tax matters covering sales tax, service tax, custom and GST, has over 30 years experience in indirect tax. In example, customs audit, customs import and export, customs valuation and classification, due diligence, sales tax, service tax, free trade agreements, free zones, licensed manufacturing warehouse, customs and import facilities. In her career, she also has worked with companies from various industries for GST and custom matters, which include the manufacturing, telecommunication, trading, energy, oil and gas, property development, construction, logistic and service industries. Last but not least, we have Mr. Nicholas Lee, Associate Director, Indirect Tax Division of Deloitte Malaysia. His experience encompasses provision of advice on sales tax and services, SST, implications of business arrangements and transactions, and engaging in SST implementation projects. He provides advice on best practices to be undertaken to mitigate risk and improve existing practices for better compliances for MNC companies. He was also involved in assisting businesses with their value-added tax, VAT, implementation in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. So maybe based on the presentation and introduction, I believe we're going to have a very interaction sessions. But the flow for today's session, we'll go for the presentation first, and later on we have a Q&A session. So ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, let's start our session by welcoming Mr. Nicholas Lee.
Hello. Thanks, Faisal. Thank you. Right. Everybody can hear me loud and clear, right? At the back. Testing. Okay, I guess I need to be closer. All right. Loud and clear? Okay? All right. So I think, firstly, thanks for coming. I think before we start off with the session, I think I would like to see perhaps a show of hands just so that I can, managed in terms of the understanding in terms of all these facilities. Here in this room, in your company, are you currently enjoying, say, import duty exemptions or sales tax exemptions? Anybody here? Quite a few, huh? Quite a few as in very little, you know. All right. Or the rest is too shy. Okay. All right. Okay, then as for the rest, I mean, just to understand, are you even aware that there's all these facilities or not? Or maybe because you're in a different department. All right? Okay, never mind. Okay. All right. So I think before we go into the, before we go into the main course, all right? So we just show you a bit of some infographics here, taken from the Department of Statistics of Malaysia. So you can see here, it seems that Malaysia is quite manufacturing oriented. These are the numbers of items that we actually export out of Malaysia, all right? And you can see it's quite manufacturing centric. And I think, as acknowledged, I think by our finance minister during the budget, it's like he's looking to make Malaysia an industrial export-oriented, hub, a nation. All right. So, looking at the next slide here, you can see are the countries of whom we export most of our goods. So you can see, I think main ones would most likely be, say, perhaps Singapore. China, I think we're seeing a rise in exports to that. USA, I think probably thanks to the trade war. That's right. And then the rest, I think it's quite distributed. So you see, the thing is, export is one thing. But of course, when we want to remain competitive and to compete with especially neighboring countries at the global market, the most important thing is always the first word our bosses always say: cost. Right? Cost not competitive, cut cost. Right? But the question is that how do we actually manage this cost? That is one thing, and that's why I think if you look at it carefully in Malaysia, I think our government has put in place quite a few facilities. But the thing is, the awareness, I think, at this stage are still not there yet, because in fact, just 2 days ago, I had a con call with a few of my clients, and they were saying, okay, is there any way to get exemptions, reduce duties, or sales tax costs? And I think when we mentioned a few, they were surprised that, oh, okay, this thing exists. All right? So I think that's the purpose of today, is to actually give that awareness. So amongst of the many ones that we are going to cover today, all right? But before we go through that, these are the key considerations. Of course, when you manufacture or do trading, sometimes you get things from overseas, all right? And when you bring in goods into Malaysia, there will be import duties, there will be sales tax costs, all right? And then, not only that, and sometimes when you want to engage into something or get services, etc., tax will all be incurred as well. And unfortunately, I think right now for Malaysia, we're just fresh out of the abolishment of GST, right? Sales tax, service tax, all these incurred will be a cost to the company. So because of that, now we need to be more vigilant in really identifying whether these have exemptions or not. We need to rely on exemptions already moving forward. So that's why I think in terms of competitiveness, aside from controlling the cost in terms of exemptions and etc., there's also one more thing. When you export your goods to other countries, right? I think you know the US and China trade war is if it's Chinese item, they're going to impose higher tariff, right? So you will start to see there's a huge influx of businesses coming to Malaysia. You want to manufacture in Malaysia, export to US, all right? But the question is, even though you manufacture in Malaysia, some process, and then you export to the US, how sure are we that those items would can I'll say circumvent that trade I'll call it discrimination, I'm going to put it that way, right? So it's just not looking at exemptions, but also you need to consider when you export to those countries, your customers, or maybe if you have operations in that country, when you bring in those items, would there be cost or not, right? So that's when we'll come in to, oops, what's this? Oh, sorry. All right, thanks. Okay. So that's when now we'll look at free trade agreements. Is this familiar to anybody here? Free trade agreements? Some. All right. For the rest, I think, what are free trade agreements? So these are technically agreements signed between countries, in layman term, all right? So this is agreement to say that, okay, certain goods moving between these countries, all right, as part of this agreement, they don't impose, or perhaps they impose lesser duties, or they don't impose duties at all, all right? So that is the crux of it. I think a lot of people heard of the term TPPA, right? That is also a form of free trade agreement, but didn't take off. But not to fret, I mean, in fact, Malaysia has its own group of free trade agreements, FTAs for short. And we have good relationships, like say, with ASEAN, all right, New Zealand, China, India, and all that. You can see all these countries over here, okay? So what does it mean? So it means that we have relationships in terms of agreements with these countries, potentially the items, well, specific items are coming from these countries into Malaysia, all right? There's an opportunity where you can actually bring them in with no import duties at all. Zero import duty. Or to a certain degree, lower import duty, all right? Another thing also is that if you happen to be exporting to these countries, all right, your customers, or perhaps if your so-called sister companies in those countries, right, when you bring in the goods, they see, oh, it's coming from Malaysia, okay? Then at the importing country, they will also enjoy zero duties, all right? That's why you hear a lot of talks like you need to go to MITI to apply what we call certificate of origin and etc. So these are just to prove that the items are actually coming from the country of export. All right? So what exactly this thing does is that it gives you what we call as a preferential import duty rate. In other words, it gives you a special rate, right? But everybody needs to be aware that free trade agreements does not help you reduce our sales tax, all right? Sales tax is an all different matter together, okay? And what are the main requirements usually? Let's look at from an import perspective. You import something from China. How do you actually use this FTA? So typically, the common practice is that you request for what we call as a certificate of origin from the exporting country. So then the question is, what is this? What is certificate of origin? It's like your birth certificate. You're made in Malaysia, you need to show proof, all right? So this is as if it's like that birth certificate of that exporting country, all right? So usually to issue this kind of documents, they have specific requirements, right? From the importing side, you can just request from your suppliers. Then the next thing, when you want to sell outside of Malaysia, all right, you want to make your product, you want to ensure your product is attractive, okay? Then if your item is being whacked with high duties at the importing country, demand will drop, of course, right? So for the exporting country in Malaysia, you also need to check whether do you meet the what we call as a certificate of origin rules, all right. A good example is, say for example, like I have a label, like a sticker. If I stick it on a television I imported from China, can I say that's made in Malaysia? Not necessary, right? So there's always rules. So there's rules to actually tell to what extent the item can be considered as made in Malaysia to that extent, right? So that's when when you want to export, we need to comply with rules we call as rules of origin, right? So that we can say, oh, this is coming from Malaysia, and then in the importing country, they can enjoy preferential. And one more thing, free trade agreements, right? It's not a one size fit all, Different agreements will have different conditions, all right? We have set meal for vegetarians, and we have those for the meat eaters. It's something like that, all right? So that is the gist in terms of free trade agreements. And to see the illustration here, so this is how we illustrate how it will impact. So for example, in this scenario, we have a company that imports, say, mixer machinery with this code, from Thailand into Malaysia. So you butter, just bring this thing in, right? This thing would attract import duty of 20%. So you can see here, your duty payable is, say the value is 100,000, right? The duty payable is 20,000. This is just an example, but usually machinery is in the millions, right? So if we were to use, say, for example, the ASEAN Free Trade Agreement, ATIGA, we actually have an agreement with Thailand. So by utilizing that FTA, right, we can actually bring the item without any import duty. So you can see there's actually in this illustration, there's an effective savings there, right? So let's look at exports. Incoterms are delivered, duty paid. So that means usually it's the exporter who bear at the importing country, correct? So, assuming that you export this, say, for example, to Thailand, right? Then you need to pay duties in Thailand for about 10,000, say, ringgit, all right? Because you need to bring it into the country, But if we were to use the free trade agreement, we can have the certificate of origin saying it's from Malaysia. We can save that 10,000 when we actually bring it over to that country. So you can see that there's some significance in using free trade agreements. And one thing good about free trade agreements is also, from my experience, we use this as insurance. Why? Because for those who are enjoying import duty exemptions, all right, especially those issued by MIDA, this is sidetrack a bit. You have times when customs come in and then they dispute, hey, the item you bring is not exactly the item you declared in your application or your import forms. I dispute, that's not it. So because of that, you need to pay duties. The duties that you're somehow exempted. So in most cases, you say, well, I mean, as an insurance, if you really concede with what they say, well, at least I have a free trade agreement. These items I actually bring from these countries should be zero. So in addition to disputing the claims from the officers, but this is our plan B, all right? And there have been many cases that we somehow rely on this to actually save our hides, all right? Okay. So, I mean, FTA is quite simple. The complexity is more on the technical stuff. I don't want to bore everyone here. It's more of determining the origin. They have their own rules. That one, if you want to know where can I find this, actually it's already in MITI's website. There's a very long agreement that tells you, because this is between countries, right? So, a lot of things to read there. The next one is licensed manufacturing warehouse. So, what exactly is a licensed manufacturing warehouse? All right. So, this is a facility that is granted to export-oriented manufacturers. All right. In other words, it's like a gold pass of giving import duty exemptions. All right. Another good thing about this facility is that in addition to giving import duty exemption, I think for sales tax purposes, all right, for sales tax purposes, you also, in layman terms, also get exemption, right? Because a licensed manufacturing warehouse is deemed a special area for sales tax purposes. So so that means you get two types of exemptions here. And usually the conditions for licensed manufacturing warehouse look simple, 80% export. There's a reason, because they are saying this is export oriented. So to boost up, they need to really facilitate your cost there. So one thing good is that any items, machinery, etc., you actually bring in into the licensed LMW, it can be exempted. So in terms of restriction, in terms of the types of items you bring in, usually is pretty lax in a sense. But of course, giving you an exemption is one thing. There's no such thing as a free lunch. So they will, of course, have their own requirements and own compliance needs. And in terms of compliance needs, first you need to be a manufacturer. This is something that is inconsistent in states, but we have heard that even LMWs by right shouldn't be undertaking trading activity. That's something that needs to be disputed. You need to make sure that you meet the 80% quota. Sometimes, depending on your business needs, you can actually adjust the quota, but subject to approval. All right? And one of that is that because they're giving you exemption, they do not want you to misuse, or they want to ensure that the government's housing revenue is protected in a sense. So you need to make sure the infrastructure of your factory, for example, needs to be, I would say, safe in the sense that you have like security cameras, you have a safe guardhouse there, fencing and all stuff to protect the items there. Because don't be surprised, there will be some businesses who usually don't have this kind of facilities, and they thought that you can actually apply for this exemption. And as part of the application process, customs usually send their officers there to inspect to say, okay, not audit, but to check whether is that place even suited for this. In other words, you need to be quite compliant in that sense in order to get this exemption. But overall, of course, the perks is good. But then, in terms of compliance, you need to do reporting, etc. Any single thing, anything that goes in and goes out, you need to get approval, right? So one point that was raised by one of our clients is that yes, it's good. You get a lot of exemption from both sides. But then, in terms of needs, if it increases my compliance cost, then maybe I can consider other types of exemption. I'll be covering shortly, but not necessarily just because this one covers all types of exemptions means it's always a good thing, right? It all depends on needs also. Okay. All right. I think bonded warehouse facilities, I think, is something that is quite well known to a lot of people. Right? If you want to suspend, especially you're engaged in trading, right? You want to suspend import duties and especially sales taxes, right? You can actually bring into a bonded warehouse, right? So this one, I think, is usually provided by, say, third-party, say, warehouse service providers, and then one of the downside is that I think because right now we have service tax and stuff like that, right? So I think we have heard cases where even these service providers are on the warehouse, right? They are charging you, they can even charge service tax on the grounds that it's management service. Actually, there are a few cases like that, right? But of course, the good thing here, despite the bigness of service tax, sales tax and import duty goes in, should be suspended in a sense, right? So there's actually two types of bonded warehouses, one public and one private. So I think, as you know, private is more like keeping your own, your goods for your own use. Whereas the public one is more like keeping for other people in a sense. So the ones that you always seek out from a third-party service provider, those are usually public bonded warehouses, right? And usually when it comes to application, it's quite strict also, right? And the third point here we have is free zones. So free zones, we have typically two types, free industrial zone and free commercial zone, right? Free commercial zone is more for trading activities, whereas the free industrial zone is more catered to manufacturing-based companies, right? And these are specific areas where you will need to apply for approval to operate in those zones, right? And usually when items that goes in, say, actually most items, you import raw materials, trading items, you bring into the free zone, is usually suspended from import duty and sales tax as well, right? Except for, I think, a few items like forklifts and cranes. There are some exceptions, but these are usually not critical items for manufacturing purposes, right? But of course, when it comes to activities, they're quite limited in a sense. Free industrial zone, you can only do manufacturing. Commercial zone is that you don't do trading. So there can never be the other way around. So that's why you may run into, like, say, compliance issues, like, say, you import goods supposedly for manufacturing purposes, but somehow you use it to trade, right? So that is one of those restrictions, right? And of course, in operating free zones, I'm not sure about the market there, but sometimes I receive comments from some of our clients that says that operating within these areas is also quite expensive. And I think the same goes for bonded warehouses also. One case was like, I think by using the warehouse, I think for 1 week, they had to pay 30,000 ringgit. Yeah, that's quite a lot, right? Okay. So those are the more overall ones. We also have, like, say, specific exemptions as well. These are usually applied through my, actually you can see item 4 and 5 here, they are almost the same, all right? Typically, it gives you exemption on the grounds that you are actually are involved in certain sectors, right? Looking at the 4, there are exemptions given to certain sectors, like, say, tourism, all right? Maybe agriculture and stuff like that. Okay, and the good thing about this is that as long as you're in those sectors, right, you need to comply with some conditions, but at least they don't have the restriction to ensure that 80% is exported. Right, they don't have the kind of requirements, so it's slightly more free. And of course, in terms of how to say conditions in using this kind of exemption, you must usually make sure that the item that you bring in with the exemption is specific for that purpose. Say, for example, if you're talking about tourism, right, to build up, say, a theme park, it needs to be used for the purpose of building that theme park. Okay. And in this case, if it's for manufacturing, it needs to be used directly for the purpose of manufacturing, right? Likewise for item number 5, item number 5 is also for manufacturers. But also, in addition to that, I think we are also aware that there is there are sales tax exemptions as well. Okay, sales tax exemption where you can actually apply through customs, right? And usually these are for raw materials, okay. So this is, I think, mostly is something that you may have heard. But more interesting thing is, I think we've all been following the announcement of the budget, right? And one of the announcements in the budget, or perhaps in the budget speech, and the proposed amendments that they're introducing this thing called the approved major exporter scheme. All right. So what exactly is this? Well, you see, I think not covered in my earlier slides. Have you heard of the term drawback? Import duty drawback, sales tax drawback. I see some nods. Good. I'll just do a quick introduction. Drawback is more like when you acquire something, you incur import duty or sales tax, you pay. You can actually claim for refund if it's exported, if the item is exported, subject to conditions again. And I guess everybody may have gone through the nightmare of applying. You apply, wait for 12 months later. Oh, still waiting for verification. What verification? And probably more than a year, only then you get your refund. And the application process can be very daunting. So after several complaints and etc., and I think there's a lot of lobbying involved. That's why now they decided to introduce this approved major exporter scheme. So what exactly is this? So what this does is that if the company is really export-oriented, maybe again at least 80% of your items are exported, right? So this is a scheme where it grants exemption to you. Like in the case of traders, right? They give you an exemption. So instead of applying for a drawback, incur first, then wait for refund, it helps you save up in terms of cash flow, right? This one. That is for the traders. Then in terms of manufacturers, right? Unfortunately, from the manufacturer's perspective, the requirements are very specific. Okay, this is for sales tax. The specific requirement is that you, of course, first need to be manufacturing non-taxable goods, but the goods need to be exported. Needs to meet that export threshold of at least 80%, right? And the items that you bring in to manufacture those goods would be in the category of like raw material, components, and packaging materials. So you need to be under that category only you can actually qualify to apply for this exemption. So one of the conditions is that if you happen to sell those items locally, then you need to pay up the sales tax back to customs, right? Then of course the question is that, hey, how am I going to pay? In terms of the administrative, the guidelines are not out yet, but there will definitely be a way to pay, right? Okay. Unfortunately, this is, I think, of all goodies there is in the budget, this is just one of them. But again, there's still a lot of discussions being held to see whether more exemptions can be introduced. All right. So, all right. So I think this is just a short one. So what I've covered here so far are the different types and various types of exemptions and facilities. I think so those are just high level. It's just tip of the iceberg. I think what we need to do is, I think when we go back again, maybe look at the business, then start looking at the resources, whether, okay, explore what are the types of exemptions we have. There are a lot of sites you can actually go, Meet for one. MIDA, or even customs websites that go through the order, they have those specific exemptions there. And understanding how the exemptions works, one thing, whether it applies to your business and how you can actually use it. And secondly, how to actually comply with compliance requirements. Because a lot of businesses fail to consider that, all right, once I get the exemption, finish line already. But there is more challenges, like say, you better make sure when you get this exemption, it's only used for this purpose. But maybe due to my nature of my business, how am I going to tell whether it's used for a particular purpose or not? All right? And that's one thing. Then another thing is more like the exports. When I export, am I able to get, how to say, those FTAs for my importing, for those countries which are importing my goods? How am I going to capitalize on that? Can I change some parts of my manufacturing, right? Pump in some costs so that I can satisfy certain origin rules or something like that. So all these compliance requirements is just something that we need to really drill in order to how to say, appreciate the fact that whether we can actually use this for to facilitate our business. Right? Okay. So I think without further ado, I'll be passing on my session to Eugene. Come more on the tax matters. Right? Thanks.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I must say that tax is a very dry session. Are you still awake? Okay, because I've covered the indirect tax part, today I'm going to talk about from the corporate income tax, what are the incentives available, and we can look into. We are supposed to finish right now. So we will, I'll just do a quick one, and you'll see how, okay. So for corporate income tax, there are incentives available and given to company which has got an increase in export over the year. So this incentive is actually available since 1998, but over a period of time, they have keep amending the conditions. So the latest Gazette order was issued just this year, 2019, but they backdated it to year of assessment 2016. So for company resident in Malaysia, incorporate in Malaysia, and undertaking manufacturing or agriculture activity, you can actually enjoy this incentive by getting an increase in export. So the other condition that I need to highlight is that here. So in the latest Gazette order, they actually add in one condition to say that in order for you to qualify for the incentive, at least 60% of the issued share capital of the company must be directly owned by Malaysian citizens. So if you are a company and the shareholder is individual, Malaysian, not an issue. But if you have a corporate holding company and you are a subsidiary undertaking this export, because your shareholders is a corporate company and it's not an individual, basically you do not qualify for this incentive. So you need to think about if you are in that situation, restructure your group operation if required. Okay. So what are the incentives available? You're going to look at the value add of your product. So if you're a manufacturer company, and if the company, the product value add is more than 30%, we'll let you know how to calculate the value add later. So if the value add of the company is more than 30%, basically the increase in the value of export for the particular year, 10% equivalent to that value will qualify for incentive. Okay. If your value add is 50% or more, then the allowance given to you is equal to 15% of the value of increased export in that particular year of assessment. But for company that in the agriculture business, there's no value add requirement. And you talk about agriculture business, it's not all agriculture produce. The agricultural product that qualify for this incentive is only fresh and dry fruits, flowers, plant, ornamental fish, prawn, cuttlefish, and squid. Only if you produce all this, you can qualify for the 10% allowance. And whatever allowance that you cannot utilize in carry forward it indefinitely. So there is no expiry date if you can't finish using this allowance in the particular year of assessment. But this incentive will not be applicable to company that's currently enjoying pioneer status or investment tax allowance. A lot of manufacturers actually got this kind of incentive from them. So if you are undertaking manufacturing activity, some of you have pioneer status right away. If you are claiming reinvestment allowance on your modernizations, your expansion project of your factory, you also cannot qualify for this incentive. And the products specifically excluded from enjoying this incentive are ingots. How to pronounce that actually? Sorry? Ingots. Okay, thank you. Logs, saw timber, and some of the commodity. You can go into the specific law and their police there. Okay? But for SME, they actually relax the condition in terms of value add to enjoy the same type of incentive. So if you are SME, the definition of SME is that your payout capital shall not be more than 2.5 million. If your company payout capital is less than 2.5 million, then the same incentive will be given to you, 10 and 15%. But the value add requirement for 10% allowances of increased export is only 20%. Non-SME is 30%. Okay? And to enjoy 15% allowance for increased export, your value add requirement is 40%. So it's a lower threshold. But then for agricultural produce, it's the same thing, 10% on the allowance for increased export. But what you need to take note is that this SME incentive is only valid until year of assessment 2020. For company, for example, if your company financial year end is January, so year of assessment 2020 is actually January 31st, 2020. You only got another few months to enjoy this incentive, right? So after these few months, we no longer have this special SME incentive. You go back to the norm, just now, this incentive. Wrong button.
No, it's okay, Mr.
There will be incentive, the first slide that we talk about. So the first slide actually is given to all. But if you are SME, then the threshold is lower. So after year of assessment 2020, then you go back to the original one, the one that we talk about, which require you to have at least 30% value add. Okay, how to calculate value add and increase in export. Okay. Value add is actually calculated as the sales. Make sure we have pressed the correct thing. Sales price of the goods, and we use ex-factory price less cost of raw material. That will give you a amount of value add. And to calculate the percentage, that means is it less than or more than 30%, you will use C, the amount of value add, divide your sales price times 100, then this will give you the percentage. If this is more than 30%, or for SME 20%, you qualify for incentive, right? And value of increased export, we talk about your FOB value in the current basis period, meaning current year, less your FOB export value for the basis period in the preceding year, last year. So this year, less last year, you will have a value of increased export. And if let's say the allowance given to you is 10%, there will be 10% times this amount. That will be the amount that qualifies for tax exemption. Okay. Okay, how to claim this? It's very simple. You don't need to apply. There's a form in the Lembaga Hasil website, and then in the website there it specifically states is the allowance for increased export. You download the particular form, fill it up, signed by the director. But in that form, there are documents that you need to keep. That means you got the custom declaration form, all this thing. You just make sure that you file everything together nicely. When IRB come for audit, that is the document that you need to show to them. And the amount that you calculated based on that form, you will then claim it when you submit your tax return in the particular year of assessment. So no application required. Download that form, fill up all the relevant information. Make sure the supporting document is kept 7 years years of record keeping requirement, and wait for IRB to come in and also. Okay. So let's look at some example. Okay. We have ABC Sdn Bhd here, manufacture electronic components with a paid-up capital of 2 million SME. Okay, US less than 2.5. 70% of the paid-up capital is owned by Hisha, a Malaysian citizen. So in this case, even though after 2020, you are no longer, the SME incentive is no longer available, because 70% of your paid-up capital is owned by a Malaysian, you still qualify for the normal incentive, the non-SME one. And the company closes in account for 2 years ended 31st December. So in 2017, it has an export sale of 10 million, 2018, 16 million. Your cost of goods sold for 17 and 18 is 6 million and 8 million respectively. So this is your gross profit. And at the same time, you have an overseas office that you incurred cost in maintaining the overseas office. Cost of maintenance 2017 is 1 million and 2018 1.2 million. So this is your profit and loss for 2017 and 18. So we now first have to compute our value add. Okay? Sales price 16 million, cost of raw mat 8. So your value add is 8 million. 8 million divided by 16 million. So your percentage of value add is 50%. Okay, good enough for you to claim an allowance for increased export equivalent to 15%. So what is your value of increased export for that year? Your export value for year of assessment for year 2018 is 16 million. Last year you exported 10 million, 2017. So your increase in export for that year is 6 million. Okay? 6 million times 15%, you can claim an additional tax deduction of 900,000. Or in another way to say it, 900,000 of your income in that particular year is exempted from tax. Okay? So 900,000 will give you a tax saving of roughly about 186,000. So this is how you calculate it. Now, just now we talked about company with value add of 30% or more. What happens if your company value add doesn't achieve that 30% requirement? There is also another type of incentive available. Okay? So under another Gazette order, what it says is that if your increase in export for that particular year is more than 50%, that means significant increase in export, or in that year, you actually export to a new market that you have not exported there before, or you are given an award by MITI, then the allowance given to you for a company that achieve at least 50% increase in export is 30% of your value of increased export. And if you export to a new market, other than US, Canada, Europe, all this market, then you can actually claim a export allowance of 50%. And if you got an award from MITI, then you can claim 100%. So when MITI, come up with all these evaluation to ask for all these awards, don't just ignore it. Because if you get an award from MITI, you can actually get some tax benefit. Okay. So again, let's look at how to calculate the value of increased export in terms of percentage. Again, export sales for this year, less export sales for last year, then it will give you an amount of export sales increase in this particular year, and you divide it by your last year export sales. Okay? Then this will give you percentage. If this is more than 50%, then you'll get a 30% allowance on the value of increased export. Again, how to claim this? Download another separate form from IRB website, fill it up, and make sure you keep all the relevant supporting documents. And then wait for IRB to audit. Okay, let's look at the same example. So using the same example once, right? The export sales for the current period is 16 million, last year 10. So the value of increased export is 6 million. 6 million divided by last year export will give you a 60% increase in the value in export. Because 60% 60% is more than 50, then the incentive that you can claim is actually 30% times 6 million, which will give you 1.8 million. Times the tax rate, if you are SME, then the tax saving is about 400,000. When we talk about penetrating new markets, okay, just now we say that if you happen to export to a market that you have not exported before, then basically that particular export so in that particular year, when you export to a new country, sorry, I will go back to that. In that particular year, when you export to the new country, whatever export that you make to that particular new country, you can actually get a tax exemption equivalent to 50% of that export. This can only claim once, okay? So each time when you export to a new country, this 50% is given to you only one time, the first year when you go into that new country. So the same example one, okay? So ABC company happened to have a new market. So let's say this year we have a new export to Indonesia and a new export to Thailand, which value is 1 million each. Okay? So total export to a new country is actually 2 million times the allowance given to you 50%. So the entire 1 million, 50% of this will qualify for tax exemption or additional tax deduction. Plus the existing allowance that you claim for our normal export, just now example one, we have another 900,000. So you are looking at a tax exemption of 1.9 million revenue. And the tax saving is about 426,000. Okay? What happens if the minister gives you an award? If you receive an award from the minister in that particular year of assessment, whatever increase in the value of export for that particular year, you can claim 100% additional tax deduction. So same example again, if this year you receive an award from the minister, okay, this year export is 16 million, last year is 10, so your increase in export is 6 million. So the entire increase in export of 6 million, you can claim a tax deduction, and your tax saving will be 1.4 million. So it's a significant amount. So what we talk about is actually manufacturing and agriculture industry, and we do understand that there are some service provider here. Do you qualify for export allowance incentive as well? The answer is actually yes, right? If you are in the service industry and you export your services, meaning like for us, Deloitte, okay, now we don't qualify because we don't have that 60% shareholding by individual. In the past, before they changed the law, we can actually claim export allowance by providing accounting services to an overseas company. Okay. Service industry, the allowance given to you is actually 50% of the value of increased export. So long you export overseas, your services overseas, if this year export is more than last year, whatever increase, you get a 50% tax exemption on that increase. In addition to that, if you are promoting your product overseas, and you incur expenses like advertising expenses, samples, export market research, preparation of tender expenses, you have exhibition outside Malaysia, and if you need to redesign your packaging to ensure that your company get a better image or to suit the overseas market, all these expenses that you incurred, you can claim a double deduction. Double deduction meaning that if you incurred $1, for tax purposes, you can claim tax deduction up to $2. The original $1 expenses, on top of that, government will say that you can claim an additional $1. So it's a double deduction. Other expenses include traveling to country outside Malaysia to negotiate your contract, your airfares, your ground transport, and hotel accommodation and sustenance. There's a maximum cap here per day. And if you have an office, you maintain a sales office overseas, the cost of maintenance will also qualify for double deduction. So the same example one, just now you remember, we said that this company actually has an overseas marketing office, and to maintain an office, it incurred 1.2 million in that particular year. So this 1.2, you can claim additional tax deduction, and the tax benefit will be 220,000. So this is a slide where we summarized what are the amount of incentive that you actually claim if you really are aware of it. Okay. I think that's all that I have today for the corporate tax incentive. We would like to have just one slide to highlight to you what are the tax costs that you may want to factor in your costing when you sell your product and services to overseas, as well as the item that you need to think about when you sign an agreement with your overseas customer or supplier. You need to be aware of in your agreement that you sign with your counterparty, you need to clearly state who should bear all these tax costs. So in this example, say that you import from country A and then you export to country B, right? You need to consider the import duty. So if country B import the item from you, the import duty in this particular country, China, Thailand, Vietnam, who should bear the import duty? You got to state it very clearly in your agreement. And don't forget, there's always sales tax or VAT or GST, whatever you call it, in the other country as well. So China has got a VAT ranging from 0 to 16%. Thailand is 0 to 7, and Vietnam is 0 to 10. So when you supply your goods or services to those countries, you need to think about and state in your agreement who should bear the VAT, right? And of course, we have seen a lot of agreement where they say that I sell this machine to you, and I will also install the machine for you. So they did not split in their agreement how much is the machine cost and how much is the installation services. So when this agreement is picked up, let's say it's country B, they say that there's actually a service element, that you did not split it from the cost of your goods. And the service element attract withholding tax in the country where make the payment to you. Okay? Any service, technical service, you have got a withholding tax equivalent to from 10 to 20% in all these three countries. If there's a service portion of your product. And of course, stamp duty. When you stamp an agreement, right, bear in mind that there is stamp duty cost. Again, you have to think about who should bear the cost, and you want to state it very clearly. So, okay. I think that's all we have for today. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. I think we're going to have an interesting session, so I'd like to invite Ms. Wong to be at the table. Feel free to actually ask questions. I think the particular emphasis on this particular session is for companies, especially small and medium enterprises, to understand how tax is actually impacting your business. And I believe even myself, having worked with Malaysia for quite a number of years, I still have yet to understand there's a lot of incentive that companies can actually gain benefits. So I will open the floor for companies who have any questions. Feel free to go to any mics, and when we come, I will pass you the mic. Please, you open the floor.
So a quick one. If we are exporting cross-border, but to related companies, right? So I presume this we will not qualify for it.
The incentive doesn't restrict whether you export to related company or not. So even if you export to related company, you will still qualify. But the only thing you need to take care is transfer pricing. So your price that you sell must be outside of the
Any questions?
Sorry, one point to highlight is that if you there's a change of the law requiring the Malaysian company to have 60% share owned by an individual. So I think because of that, you may not qualify unless you restructure the REIT. Because if you talk about related company, what I can imagine is that your Malaysian company, right, basically should be owned by a corporate shareholder somewhere, right? If your shareholder is a corporate entity and it is not an individual, you may not fulfill the requirement whereby 60% of your company share must be owned by a Malaysian citizen, individual, not So in the past you can, but they changed the law since 2016. Then you can. Before 2016, actually.
Just to clarify what you said just now. You mean that if we import from ASEAN country to Malaysia, with the FTA agreement member country, we enjoy zero import tax. That's why.
Yeah. Technically, in a way, yes, but also depends on whether the items fall within the list of items in the FTA. So in that agreement, they have a list of items and tariff for each one. So all you need to do is you need to match that item, whether it's inside there. Okay, if it's inside, good. They will have rates over there, and commonly it's zero because in fact that's the target that they try to achieve. Free trade, that's why I call it, right? But one more thing also, just because it's coming from another ASEAN country doesn't necessarily mean you automatically get it. You need to make sure that they are able to issue a certificate of origin. Right?
If I may add on, the easier way is customs on the website where they have all the rates stated there. So if you have the description of the goods that you're importing and the HS code, because when the exporting country send the good out from their country, they would at least have the 6-digit HS code. So you use that HS code, go to our Malaysian customs website under the Explorer, you are able to see whether the goods, so you must match the description and the HS code, whether it's put up for preferential. If yes, then the next step is whether the supplying country can give you the certificate of origin. Okay?
Regarding the goods export certificate, just to mention that the export price minus the raw material equal to value-added cost, value-added. Let's say
Is the sale price less than cost of manufacturing? Yeah, you have that value time divided by the 65 day.
so let's say raw material, I receive a project, I buy more raw material, but I sell to my support because I should have a machine to produce it. So is this considered?
Because this incentive is given to manufacturer.
We are manufacturer, but we do have all the machine. So some of the machine we do have. So it's out of our capacity. So we sell to others. So is this considered as value added as well?
What you are saying is that part of the manufacturing activity you actually let other people to do. You don't manufacture yourself.
For some items.
Then when you come back, when your subcon manufacturing that you do, because that means you should co-manufacturing. Your subcontract is a co-manufacturer. Because whatever that is manufactured by your subcontractor, right, will form your cost of raw material. So your cost of raw material will go up. You know what I mean? So let's say I need to build this mic, okay? This part is manufactured by a subcontractor. So when the subcontractor manufacture and sell to you this part of it, then it's your raw material cost.
Another question, because I just know about this export incentive, right? So what if my tax agent didn't help me to this incentive? So year, I guess 2019, we do have any export activity. So in terms of the percentage we count, can we consider we don't have any export in 2018? What we did?
For 2018, you have the value one, but you cannot start from zero. So 2018, although you do not claim the incentive, right? And but then you already have an export value. It doesn't mean that you got to claim every year. It's just that if you claim, say, 2019, so your this year export less your last year export. Last year, even though you don't claim, you still have the export value. Yeah. Maybe change tax agent.
Because my tax agent become into claim. So that means, let's say
the increase will still have the value. You still have to come up with.
Let's say not like 15% or how, less than that. Then this means I can't get any incentive at all.
Because you see, last year you didn't claim. They talk about actual sales. Whether you claim or not, it doesn't matter. When you have an actual export, say 100 last year, even though you didn't claim anything, this year is 120. So the 20 ringgit is still an increase in export.
When we click, there is any income tax, we didn't separate whether we export or not export.
You just, because that's why you look at the form, you're going to download the form. The form will tell you, actually the form is very detailed. They will guide you step by step. What is your sales value at will be last year? And you've got to collate all your income declaration form, match it up to that. Because when people do audit, like for us, when we do an audited account, we will not segregate how much is export, how much is local sales. So it's something that internally you will come up with that like record and documentation.
And then regarding the double tax deductions, do we need to prepare any tax document, or we need to get any approval from MATRADE?
Some of the double D is like some exhibition. It's only those exhibitions. I think it's MATRADE. Yeah, it's the government agency. If it's MATRADE, then MATRADE will have to give you that endorsement. But other than that, I never really know. So again, it's a form in the RRD website. I download it, and then we fill it up, and then whatever all these receipts, we have to keep track. And maybe consider change taxation.
Regarding just now you mentioned that if let's say in these circumstances we purchase raw material and then certain raw material will pass to a subcontractor to the manufacturer, and then there was a impact to us, right? So under these circumstances, our origin raw material consider raw material or that the new one.
Because the subcontractor, when they value add, they have their own value add.
Correct.
So that value add will form part of your cost. Hence, it will reduce your value. You know what? So we bring in the material is 10 ringgit, but when let's say you pass it to him and come back with 12, so your cost will now increase to 12. You will then reduce your value add. Okay, the LMW is indirect tax. So what we talk about is direct tax. So it's not mutually exclusive. You can claim for. Yes.
I have a question on export incentive, the increased export incentive that we offer services. Do franchise businesses and franchise services fall under this category? I didn't say this, but how is it classified?
It's actually inside here. import duty. Actually, my company, we are doing the titanium coating on stainless steel. So I encountered a Singapore customer who wish to send their product over to Malaysia to do coating. So after the coating, I will actually send them back their products and just charge them my coating cost. But I encountered a problem, we get the import duty. So is there any way for us to exempt the import duty?
Are you repeating that again? Sorry.
We are a company who do the coating on stainless steel. So the customer, they used to send their product over to Malaysia. In this case, it's actually Singapore send their product out to Malaysia to do the
Which is steel?
stainless steel, yeah. So the problem we encounter is we gonna the import duty. But by the way, actually the product, eventually we will actually send it back to Singapore. For me, I just charge them the coating cost. But I end up having to pay the import duty as well. So is there any way to exempt that?
Product because when your stainless steel, if I understand you correctly, when Singapore send the stainless steel item to you, the customs treat as the value of the item, right?
Yeah.
So when you quote, you send out, there's no problem. Your problem is when you
Yes.
that is import duty.
Yeah.
That is sales tax. Both are applicable, right? Yeah, because the customs treat that stainless steel as a regulation.
Yeah, in Malaysia, they will charge me the import duty. But in Singapore, there is no problem at all.
Yeah, because Singapore hardly impose import duty on every importation. So I think from the Malaysian perspective, let us analyze from this perspective. Yeah, when your stainless steel being done by you coating or whatever you do, whether it's considered as manufacturing. See, if it is considered as manufacturing, so likelihood is you have the option of if after you quote a product is subject to sales tax, so they have the sales tax license. So are you already sales tax
Especially
license?
for stainless steel item are exempted from sales tax. There is no sales tax. So basically, when they import to Malaysia, they send it to Malaysia, go through the customs, you need to pay the import duty. Yeah.
Okay, so meaning your finish coat in a way after coating is the same item, right?
It's the same item, just with the color.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So from the law of things, we cannot register the sales tax because the finished good are not taxable. Okay, so now for the import duty, you have to persuade MATRADE, right? Because in a way, your manner of doing things may qualify as manufacturing. Because if you look at the Sales Tax Act, the Customs Act, manufacturing is to do something where the nature changes, right? Because photo before and after is different. Right? You have to talk to MATRADE whether they allow you to bring in that stainless steel before putting exempted from import duty. So this one is not customs level.
So eventually, I still do not know what's the solution. I talked to customer, I talked to MATRADE, nobody is able to give me answer. At the end, I just paid. But that is increase the cost to my customer. In fact, we share the cost, but it's actually not a good business for my customer. Actually, it's a lot much more expensive.
Actually, I think where Poppy is coming from is that qualify whether it is we get exemption or because MATRADE they give for manufacturing.
Yeah.
So the concern is more like whether your coating process in the eyes of MATRADE can they treat it as manufacturing or not. That's the first step, right? Then second one, because I recall, if I'm not mistaken, I heard it before, where when it comes to steel, I understand it is not their policy to give exemption for steel, but instead, one of our clients is required to claim a drawback instead. So you bring in, you process already, right? Then you re-export. Then, in fact, there is a drawback for manufacturing also for import duty. Not for the sources. So there is a drawback. there's a drawback. So that one, the only problem about that drawback is that you can only claim 90% of the import duty that has been paid, right? But there will be an application process. So before you bring, before you export the goods, you first need to, you first need to apply the customs, the state customs. Then they verify the factory and etc. Then when your goods are finally exported, then that's when you make this drawback application to the customs officer, right? Then after that, they will start doing the verification process before they finally give you the refund of duties.
Okay, so in this case, I should work with MIDA or work with the customs officer?
I think we can start off with MIDA first, just to check. Check firstly on one, do you fall under this manufacturing? Secondly, whether do they have any policy that inhibits exemption for steel? Because I think recently there's been some announcements and one of our clients doesn't. So that's one thing. Then the second, if really these two options cannot pakai already, then you look at the application of drawbacks, right? The 90% one.
The drawback is under customs.
Yes, that's right.
I think we just end up the whole gist is you have to prove to MIDA customs that you are doing manufacturing. Because the whole process is the work is manufacturer. So manufacturing based on customs act, from what I see, qualify because that's the nature, before and after the nature change. Though your factory is the same, the nature has changed, right? The total that before and after. So you have to influence MIDA and explain to them. Because the drawback method, the difficulty is there is a formula. Because the 90% is you don't touch the item comes in, you re-export the same item. You want to get 90%. But for manufacturing, the drawback is based on the formula. That one is customs area. So our view is to try to influence MIDA to say that you are manufacturing, that if they say, okay, your product can be considered for duty exemption to bring in, so you don't pay duty because it's not subject to zero size, and it's for re-export. That one is cleaner. Okay, thank you. I work with MIDA. Yeah, you try to, but you tell them you are manufacturing, you are showing them the processes, so you have the steps. Okay.
Thank you. I'm just going to allow one more question.
Yeah, my question is, my foreign customer send me the raw material to my factory. I just doing the reprocess work. I'm the manufacturer. So I reprocess. I only receive the goods, raw material. The product is ingot. It's our nature products. Then I send back to the customer in overseas, China. The material, I don't know where this comes in, maybe Australia or maybe America. So if include to the tax, this one, which party have to pay? Because I'm doing the reprocess work in Malaysia factory. Then I export our nature same kind of the products. So if we export, need to pay any tax if any. So we only receive the raw material from them. It's not buying from us. So how I claim for the tax if any?
Okay, I try to repeat your question, meaning you are doing manufacturing for an owner outside Malaysia. So when he sends the raw material and component to your factory, there's no sale, right? Am I right? Because it's his good, he sent to you. So after you process, you export back to him. So in your revenue, you may charge them a manufacturing service process, correct? So for sales tax and import duty purposes, customs will look at when your import duty and sales tax touches the import station. They don't have to pay. So who pays is your duty, like if you say you have to work with the owner, that any duty and tax you should be liable because it's not your goods. So your contract must be clearly stated. But because you are the manufacturer, extra. Okay, so that option just now you mentioned, whether you qualify to get those components free of duty, free of sales and any modules manufactured.
Before that is the custom clearance. Who had to process and prepare all those documentation?
So that's why the importer comes into picture, who is liable to the declaration. You see, there are cases whereby the owner, they don't want to pay and know the value of their component. They will appoint a local forwarding agent in Malaysia to declare the goods for them. So what you receive, what you deliver to be paid. This you are not required to worry about the clarification, the classification. It's their duty.
This is what the party.
Yeah, the owner is the overseas owner. So a lot depends on your agreement with them. So who is your agreement? Yeah.
But the inland original certificates we can waive.
Sorry?
The certificate of inland origin.
Oh, the certificate of origin. If you see, if you can produce it and you get it from PG, so when you export this finished good back to, let's say, the owner in China, because ASEAN and China they have FTA, so you have to check whether that product is offered for preferential from the China side. If that is, you help them to prepare the certificate of origin. So when this good go back to China, they pay preferential import duty. Preferential can be zero, can be small duty, depends on the code. Yeah, because you see, import, the VAT or GST is charged on the value of the imported goods plus the import duty. So if your import duty comes down, the VAT GST rate is also smaller. We are not. So the FTA itself not only help you in import duty saving, also help you in the domestic taxes of GST, sales tax. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Wong. I wish I could extend the Q&A session, but I was given the mandate, So I would like to conclude. Okay, number one, this is very difficult for Malaysian companies to understand in which sector you are in, whether you're in manufacturing or you're in services, and maybe you are in agriculture. And number two, you need to do your own homework and get more information about your trading partners or your targeted countries. You need to understand their tax structures, their incentive, and so on. And of course, here you have your own homework being done, and you know what incentive you can utilize. So I think one thing that our colleagues in Deloitte already shared, we still have time, few months for you to get the export incentives. You just download the forms from the custom website and fill up in, and you have a chance to actually get some savings, right? So without further ado, before we end this session, I would like to invite Mr. Abu Bakar Yusuf, Senior Director of Market Access and Export Promotion Division, to actually present a certificate and a token of recommendation to our guest speaker. First, I would like to invite Ms. Tamli Jui. Ms. Wong Pur Gang. Last but not least, Ms. Nicholas Lee. Okay, very short photo session between Mr. Abu Bakar and our guest speaker. Please hold the guest speaker, Mr. Abu Bakar. Esteemed guests, ladies and gentlemen, thank you to Mr. Abu Bakar Yusuf from our guest representative from Deloitte, Malaysia.